Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. This is going to be my February wrap-up, where I will be talking about all of the books I read in February, what I thought of them, so on. I might also mention a few movies, shows, things like that I've been watching, just because it's fun. We have a lot to talk about because I read a total of 7 books in February. I DNF'd 1 book, and I think I will actually finish a book today, so I'm gonna bring that. 8 books. I read 8 books in February. By the time I'm filming this, I'm not yet done with them, but hopefully by the time I'm publishing this video, I will have some new graphs with stats for you to see. So I don't know the page number, the average rating and stuff like that yet, but we can at least look at the number of books, which are 8. We can talk about the genres. In February, I read 2 fantasies, 3 general fiction, literary fiction, contemporaries, 1 romance, 1 mystery, and 1 horror. A total of 8 books, because I'm gonna finish one today. That's the aim. Rating-wise, I still don't know what I'm rating the last one, but out of the 7 books I have completed till this day, sorry if this is confusing, but hey, I gave 1 book 2 stars, 1 book 3 stars, 2 books 4 stars, and a total of 3 books 5 stars. Which means that this was actually a pretty epic reading month, and I'm super happy with that. I used to have a target audience / demographics stat page. Since I mainly read adult books, I don't really see any point in me having that, because it will just be me every month saying I read 100% adult books, so I'm scrapping that. Let's give a couple of updates about my yearly reading goals, I guess. I will update you regarding my physical TBR later on, so I will do that quarterly. You will get a specific video for that. If we consider the buzzword-a-thon, I did complete the challenge for February, which means that I'm still keeping up with this challenge. For the 12 books recommended by 12 friends, I also read a book from that one in February, so I'm also 2 for 12 in this one. And regarding Globetrotter-a-thon, this is actually the challenge where I DNF'd the book. So I'm only 1 for 12 at the moment, but we'll see how things play out throughout the year. I have an idea that by the end of the year, in like November, December, I will do like a dedicated reading rush or readathon for all of the like challenges I have yet to complete. So perhaps this Central American book is something I will just get to later on this year. Let's talk about the books I read. In February I went traveling. I went to Thailand with one of my best friends. We spent a lot of time in sun chairs, tanning, relaxing and reading. So I read plenty during my 12 days away, which I'm super happy about. It was so nice to just dedicate your entire day to read and not feel like you had any other things that you needed to get done. I'm so happy with how my reading abroad turned out. And actually 3 out of the 5 books I read while I was abroad, I gave 5 stars. So that is pretty epic in itself. The first book I read and finished in February was The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I read this for the first along, the read-along that Becca and the Books are hosting for the next couple of years. This is the first book in the First Law series. This has been one of my TBR vets. This is in one of my first hauls when I started BookTube. And I've been meaning to get to it for so long. I've had it on multiple TBRs and I finally read it. It looks a bit tattered and battered because like it got wet, waves were crashing into me as I was walking on the beach and stuff. But it sort of works for this particular book, so I'm not mad about it. I personally love when a book looks well read, well used, all of that. So I really don't mind this. This is an epic adult fantasy that is sort of the cover book for the grimdark subgenre in fantasy. Now, grimdark is basically when we're not necessarily following the heroes of the story, and there's a lot of grey morality. Many of the characters that are the main characters are people that are like bad or the villains and stuff like that. And this is like the grimdark story. Another thing with this book is that it's very well known, especially this first book in particular, for being extremely character driven. I was talking about this book to my friend, and I struggled so hard with coming up with the plot. And like there isn't even a plot on the backside. The backside describes 3 characters that we are following. We're not really getting any sense of like the main plot in this universe, this series. In this story we are following 3 characters. We have Logan Ninefingers, who is an infamous barbarian. We have Giselle Dan Luther, who is someone who's like training for some type of tournament or something like that, and is known for being selfish. And then we have Glokta, who is a cripple turned torturer. These are the three main characters we are following, alongside with some others, and first their stories are sort of separate, but then their stories sort of get brought together. And the thing is, there's some sort of war looming. So the plot is that there's this war that's brewing, things are happening, but it's not happening in this book. This book is just getting to know the characters, their characteristics, and sort of see how they will meet, I guess. I think the writing in this one is great, and especially the characterization. I feel like these characters are so distinct, you understand them so well, you can predict what they are going to do, how they are going to act. It's sort of funny as well, there is some humor in it. I am hoping and expecting more plots to come later on in this series. I really enjoyed this book, I gave it 4 stars. Yes, it was on my 5-star prediction years ago. It didn't end up getting 5 stars, mainly because there is no plot. But the characterization and the writing is really, really, really good. I had a good time reading this, I'm so happy I read it. I've started a new fantasy series and it feels so exciting, and all I want to do now is read fantasy, which I will, so that is super cool. The next book I read on my trip was My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You Goodbye and That She's Sorry. What is the title of this one? This book, okay? This is a book by Fredrik Backman, my favorite author, so I'm trying to read all of his books. This was the one I picked up next. I'm so happy I read it. This is the story about Elsa, who is 7, and her best friend is her grandmother, who is 77. Elsa lives together with her mom and her new boyfriend in an apartment, and in this apartment complex her grandmother also lives, and a bunch of other interesting neighbors and characters. In this story, unfortunately, Elsa's grandmother passes, but not before she leaves Elsa with her biggest adventure yet. And Elsa and her grandmother, they have also created this sort of like dream-like fantasy universe or country, like, you know, the imagination that young kids can have. That is very much present in this book. Once again, Fredrik Backman hits you with that hilarious yet heartfelt and emotional writing. The characters are so spot on as always, and you can feel the love that all of these characters have for each other. I did struggle at first a bit with all of these imaginative things that were going on. Elsa spends a lot of time in this magical universe. I wasn't really the biggest fan of that, to be honest. I was much more interested in the real conversations between Elsa and her mom and another character, their neighbors, as they were telling stories about her grandmother and stuff like that. So for me, that was what I adored and loved in the story, not so much the made-up kingdoms that are sort of like a safety net for Elsa. Because of that, I first thought I would give this a very strong 4-star, but as we got to the end of the book, I started to get emotional. I was like this close to crying on the beach. There I am, reading my book and crying while I'm laying on a beach in Thailand having coconuts and suntanning. Ending just hit me so hard, so I gave it a 5-star. The thing is, sometimes Backman's writing can be a bit too much Backman, a bit too out there, a bit too fluffy and up in the air. He does have a way of bringing it back home, and he really did it within the last 50 pages or so of this book. I greatly enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it if you are a fan of his other books. Well deserved 5-star, and I'm so happy I finally read it, and I'm so excited to continue reading the Backman books I have not yet read. Let's keep it going with the 5 stars, honestly, because the next book I read was The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, another first in a fantasy series that I've been meaning to read for years. It was in the same first haul as the Joe Abercrombie book. I read this one finally, like I was aiming for chunkers during this trip. So that's why I brought my fantasies. It was so much fun. I did not expect this book to be so much fun. I've read Sanderson before, I've read Elantris. That one was alright, I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed the world and the characters, but it really didn't impress me that much. It was a bit confusing. This one was fun, it was exciting, we had adventure, it was good. In this story, what I didn't know is that it's a heist story. which makes it even more epic. The story is basically what would the world look like if the bad guy had won. So in the story, at the start of the story, the bad guy had won and he's the one ruling the kingdom. There's a lot of like people being mistreated. So much is going to shits. And the magical part of this is so fun to discover. Basically magic is in metal, and there are some people that are able to use this metal for different types of powers, and some people can use multiple metals to enhance various powers, while some might only be able to use one type of metal. But that's one of the fun things about this book, is discovering how this magical system works. In the story we are following Win, who is a 16-year-old girl, and she's just doing whatever she can to get by. She doesn't trust anyone, she had a really rough upbringing. She is trying to survive in this world. We also meet Kelsier, who is sort of like, I don't know what to call him. He's really cool. He's really cool. Kelsier is sort of like a thief. There's a new kind of uprising being planned, and it all depends on the cunning of a brilliant criminal mastermind and the courage of an unlikely heroine. That's a good summary. I understand this now. As I said, I did not expect this book to be as much fun as it was. It was exciting, it was thrilling, I liked the characters, I liked the magic system. It was a good time. Like, I kept reading, I kept wanting more. It was so quick to read. This one was a bit slower to read because, once again, there wasn't really that much plot. This one had plot, okay? This one had plot, it was exciting and fun, and I highly recommend it. I so get the hype. I recently purchased the sequel because I just want to continue. I want to continue to stay with these characters within this world, see what's gonna happen. So another obvious 5-star. Like, obviously, I get the hype, I get it now. Next, I finished the book Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. This was for the first challenge in the Globetrotterathon, where I needed to read a book that's somehow related to South America. And this author is from Argentina. This is a short book, about 100 pages. I read it as an ebook, and I think it's about this woman being on her deathbed or something, or being in the hospital, and like someone who is not her son is sitting next to her. Is it even about a woman? I might be lying. And the entire experience of reading this book is basically a fever dream. I didn't understand jack shit. There's no chapters. I think I enjoyed it at first, but it very quickly got very confusing. And I honestly have no idea what I read. So I gave this one 2 stars. Unfortunately, at least I read it now. The next book I read while I was away was Against the Loveless World by Susanne Abulhava. And this is one of the books that were recommended in my 12 books recommended by 12 friends. And I'm so incredibly happy that I read this one. I had never heard about this book before. It's definitely not a book I would have picked up on my own, but I purchased it to my Kobo because it was on this list. And oh my god. This book is incredible. I have no things I would change about this book. This book is perfect in what it is doing. What even is this book about, you might wonder? Well, this is the story about a Palestinian refugee who is locked up in like a jail, I guess. And she's telling the story of her life. The character is locked away in solitary confinement, and she spends her days reflecting on the dramatic events that landed her in prison in a country she barely knows. She was born in Kuwait in the 70s to Palestinian refugees, and she dreamed about the perfect marriage and having kids and all of that. So while she was living in Kuwait, her life didn't really turn out the way she expected, and then the US invasion of Iraq made her a refugee. Then her and her family fled to Jordan, and then she sort of returned to Palestine, where she finds a home again. I'm explaining this in the most awful way, but boy, this story was beautiful. Everything, it's so emotional. You feel so much for these characters. Her story is heart-wrenching, and it's told in the most beautiful and lyrical sort of way, and you can really see the environments that the characters are in and understand what they are going through, and you are just rooting for everyone to find happiness, to find a home. I don't think this is like nothing I've ever read before, in the best way. I want to read more from this author. I want to read more stories like this one. There's nothing that should be changed with this book. It's perfection in the way it is. The story is rough at times, heartbreaking, traumatic, emotional, triggering, but it's so raw and honest. I highly recommend it to everyone. Obviously, I gave it 5 stars, like easy 5 stars. Those were the 5 books I read while I was away. I then got home I started to read a bit, or I started a book while I was away and continued with it when I got home, but then I also got sick, and all of my like reading vlog plans sort of fell through. I was planning on doing a romance reading vlog for around the Valentine's week. I was planning on doing a reading vlog dedicated to books with single characters. None of that really happened. I blame my 3 days of illness for throwing me off track, but I still read 2 more books. The book I started while I was away but finished when I got back home was The Lilac Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a romance book, a sapphic romance book about Delilah who goes back to her hometown. Her stepsister is having a wedding week, 2 weeks of wedding events sort of thing happening back in their old hometown, and Delilah goes there because she's getting paid for being the photographer, but her and her stepsister have a really strained relationship. When she's back home, she's sort of flooded with some bad memories, and she also meets her stepsister's best friends again. Now, many years later, there might be some sort of spark between Delilah and Astrid, the stepsister's best friend, Claire. This is a really fun and cute book. I really liked the characters and I liked the family relationships throughout the story, like the complexity between the stepsister and Delilah. But there were some things that felt a bit too rom-commy. We had like a roller skating scene, we had a let's go camping in the woods scene, and it was a bit too cliched for me. I liked the more original stuff in this story. I didn't really love the story when it leaned too much into those cliches. I gave this one 4 stars because it is still a really strong book. I am excited to continue with the series. I'm happy I read this one actually. The last book I completed in February was Finley, Donovan Jumps the Gun by El Casimano. This is the 3rd book in the Finley Donovan series. It was released last of January, so this year. I listened to the 2 first books in January and now continued the series with the 3rd one. This is my least favorite in this series. In the story we are following Finley. She is a single mother and an author, and in the first book of the series, someone confuses her for being a hit woman. One day, Finley is just sitting in a cafe with her agent and they are discussing her next book, and someone makes the mistake of assuming that Finley is a hit woman. So that woman leaves a note in Finlay's bag with a name, a place, and an amount of money, basically, making Finley into a hit woman. Things starts to go crazy from there. She sort of gets involved with the Russian mafia, and she also teams up with her babysitter. I loved the first book. It was the perfect amount of craziness and like shenanigans. The second book didn't really grab my attention as much, but I still enjoyed it. And this 3rd book felt a tad bit more like some sort of filler. We didn't really follow the main story as much. It was more these characters hanging out at a police academy for some freaking reason that I still don't understand why. I still enjoyed the writing and I still enjoyed the characters, but the plot in this one just wasn't there for me. I gave this one 3 stars, 3.5 stars, but yeah, 3 stars I guess, because it's not as good as the first book. Still happy with the series. I think there's a 4th book coming out next year. Hopefully it will bring us back a bit more to the main plot and the main story, because that's what I wanted. This one just felt like a distraction, like a side quest, something else. Those are the 7 books I have completed in February this far. I DNF'd 1 book, and that book was Queenie. This was one of the books I intended to read for my reading vlog where I read books that celebrate being single, and this book was recommended a couple of times for that, like featuring single characters, and I read about 100 pages of it, which I think is like 20-25%. In the story we're following Queenie. She is a black woman and she very recently broke up with her boyfriend, or they haven't broken up, they are on a break, but during this break they don't have any contact, and Queenie starts to go on online dating and go on dates and hook up with random people and all of that. I found this one quite depressing to read. Not depressing sad, but just the general state of dating, which is very much a good display of what modern dating is, I feel like. But that in itself was so depressing to read. I can just experience it myself. I don't need to read about modern dating. I'm not out dating, because it is very much like how this book described it. Although I don't have the same experiences as Queenie. I know this book is very greatly acclaimed for how it displays some of the racial issues and racism and like underlying racism. Obviously, that's not something I'm experiencing, but what I found depressing was the state of modern dating, and I wasn't enjoying reading about it. That's mainly it. I do think I understand why people recommended me this book and why people enjoy this book, and I do think I would probably have enjoyed the ending more than the start of the book, but I need to get through the start or the first half in order to get to the ending. And I didn't wanna. There's so many other things I would rather read right now. The book I am currently reading, and I'm hoping to finish today, is Recitative by Toni Morrison. This is my first time reading Toni Morrison, and I'm so excited about it. I've been wanting to read her books for a while, and I haven't yet. And I've been seeing this book in particular pop up here and there, so like in people's YouTube videos, on Goodreads and stuff. And I saw that my library had it, so I picked it up. This is a short story, like short, tiny, a short story by Toni Morrison about two women that we're following through life, and we don't know the races of these women. We know that one woman is black and one woman is white, but we don't know which is which. And that is sort of the mystery of the book, why this book is so talked about, because people are trying to figure out the riddle, who is black, who is white. This edition in particular have an introduction by Sadie Smith. I've also never read anything by Sadie Smith before, and actually the introduction is like half of the book. So I think this book is a total of 90 pages, but only like 40 pages are the actual story, and then the first 50 pages is the introduction. So I've kind of only read the introduction. I can't rate this book based on that introduction because that's not the book. So the plan is to finish it today. I can't really say anything about it yet, but it's gonna be interesting, and I'm curious to see if this will be a book I will think about and if I will try and solve the riddle or not. And those are my reads for February. Gonna end up with 8 books. I'm pretty happy with that actually. Hopefully I can keep up with this pace in March as well. Let's quickly, before we end this, just chat a bit about some movies and shows and music I have enjoyed in February. So since I went to Thailand, I went on like a long haul flight, both back and forth, which means I watched some movies on the plane. The first movie I watched was Elvis. This was my 3rd time watching it. I feel like I love it more each time I watch it. I just appreciate it so much more. This is gonna be my comfort movie, so I watched that, loved it. I was this close to actually watching it on my way back home as well. I then watched Ready Player One. I have not seen this movie before, but I loved the book when I read it a few years back. The movie was alright. I'm happy I've seen it now. I also watched Bridget Jones' Diary. That was the last movie I watched when I went to Thailand. This movie gets better and better. I feel like as I get older, the character of Bridget gets more relatable. Also, I understand the jokes so much more. Back home, I watched Ocean's 11 and also The Wedding Crashers. Ocean's 11 I've seen before, nothing new there. Wedding Crashers was quite funny. I've never seen it before, but the thing was, someone sitting next to me on my way to Thailand was watching it and he was laughing his ass off. So I was curious. So on the flight back home, I watched it and I understand why that man laughed a lot because I did as well. When I was sick, I watched Brother Bear because cozy and comfort movie. Last week, I saw the new Avatar movie. I might have fallen asleep a tad bit during the 3rd act, but it's a very beautiful movie. Beautiful music, wow, like the music, it reminded me of Tarzan. And as we know, Tarzan is one of my favorites. So the music reminded me of Tarzan, the colors, the views of that was stunning. It was a really beautiful movie. For shows, I've been watching Physical 100, saw the entire thing when I was sick. It was a good time. I personally think Koreans are good with reality shows. So I watched that. I watched like a season of Friends. I've almost finished the new Drive to Survive season as well. I followed the season last year, so I already knew what's gonna happen, so that's not really anything new. Oh, and obviously I'm still keeping up with The Last of Us, which is so good, by the way. The episodes just keep breaking my heart. That show is so good at introducing you to characters that you very quickly start to love or like. They are so good at that. That's just some random rambles about things I've been watching. Music-wise, I haven't really listened that much to any new music. I've listened a lot to Robbie Williams because I'm seeing him live tomorrow actually, so I've been going through his soundtracks. Today actually, Grandson released a new song called Eulogy. I think that's how it's called. That one is great, check that out if you want to. I haven't really dived that deep into music this month. That's it. That's everything I saw, read and listened to in February. Overall, February was an amazing reading month. 3 5 stars. Please let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, or seen any of the movies I mentioned as well and what you thought of them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed. Please take care and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye!
You gotta just go for it. Don't think about what comes after or what came before.
The first book I read in February, that's my dinner.